Do I love mood reading? Yes, I do. Is it conducive to being productive and getting what you want read? No. No, it's not. I want to start this video by giving a huge shout out to my top tier Wizard Master patrons. Thank you Ryan, Chris, Nico, Cody, Sharon, Scott, Mike, Patrick, Leslie, Doug, Mindlin, Aaron, Wystitch, Twainy, Spyro, Reading Rainbow, and Chris the Bookaholic. Thank you so much. Hey everyone, welcome back to Andrew's Wizardly Reads, and today, guys, we are wrapping up April of 2023. But before we get into that, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, as it does help the channel grow, and make sure to check the description box down below for information about my Patreon if you want to help support what I do here. And April was a chaotic month. I've got DNFs, I've got NFNs, I've got mood reading galore. This is the month where I really embraced that mood reading. I've been playing a lot more video games, and yet I've still managed to complete quite a few books, around I think 12 or 14 at my last count, but a lot of that is mood reading. We've got 2 carryovers from the end of March that I finished in April. We're all over the place. I ended up NFNing the Nectar for a God by Patrick Samphire. That was my patron pick. Got about 25% in and realized I was in fantasy burnout. This was only reaffirmed when I NFN'd One Foot in the Fade by Luke Arnold. I'd read enough detective-style fantasy that my brain was like, I don't want that anymore right now. So, yeah, I'm taking a small break from that. I also NFN'd The Severing Sun by Von Roycroft. It was just like, apparently my brain was just like, you've been reading a lot of fantasy lately. And so we're going to make you kind of reach for some stuff that you might not have initially planned on. And that actually ended up working fairly well for me, but also, I mean, a little bit all over the place. So, let's see. Of the books that I actually completed, we're going to start with the digitals. We're going to start with the least one, and, you guys might start flipping some tables and saying, this is outrageous. I think I gave 2 stars to Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I did not have a good time with this. I got about 40% into it, and I was having a great time. I was loving the tone, I was loving the humor, I was loving the kind of reverse Princess Bride themes, where, like, Buttercup goes after her Wesley instead of waiting around pining for his death. And so I was really enjoying that. And then all of a sudden, it got old real quick. And now this could be 100% because I'm into fantasy burnout. I've been very, very picky on my fantasy, especially even with favorite authors this month, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Yeah, it got old fast. The tone stopped working for me. The humor kind of felt overdone, and the book started feeling overlong. I wish that, I'd been much closer to the end of the book by the time I got there. And it was just, I don't know. Tress was an utter swing and a miss for me. The only good news is that I felt glad that I didn't back the secret projects. Do with that information what you will. I know, outrage. But, yeah. So I've got Frugal Wizard, I think is what it's called, which is Secret Project number 2. I'm kind of holding off on that one for a little bit right now because I need to work through some other books before I really dive headfirst into a lot of my fantasy reads. And I'm still continuing to read fantasy. I've got a ton of fantasy review copies, and so I'm just kind of mood reading through those as well. I then read The Captain by Will White, and I gave this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed The Captain. One of the things that concerns me about this series, though, is the main character is the captain of the Lost Horizon in Book 1. Book 2 is called The Engineer, so if Will White is planning to do a POV shift here, I'm not really here for that because the captain is a very interesting character, and his name is escaping me right now, which is why I keep referring to him as the captain. I enjoyed kind of the blend of sci-fi and magic, wizards in space. It was very cool. Sentient AI spaceships, kind of this hive mind, infectious like AI species. I really enjoyed that. I gave it 4 stars just because the characters felt a little bit like Traveler's Gate. They felt a little bit less nuanced than what I'm used to from Will White, mainly from Cradle. This felt kind of harkening back to the Traveler's Gate days. So, yeah. I then read and gave 5 stars to Mother of Learning Arc 1 by Nobody 103. And I had the exact opposite experience that I had with Tress here. I started out hating this book. I was like, this is boring. Zorian is not entertaining. What is going on? Why is this popular? And then the time loop mechanic kicks in, and chef's kiss. So incredibly good. I couldn't put it down until I was done. Fantastic. I love this one so much that I went and late pledged to the Kickstarters for Arcs 1 and 2 by Wraithmark Creator over on Kickstart for the hardcover edition. So I'll be getting those sometimes in January, but I had so much fun with it. Checking to make sure I haven't missed anything. Everything else should be physical. I've been all over the place this month. I was supposed to read Swan Song, and instead I read Boys Life. I haven't even hauled this book yet, but basically I listened to the audiobook because it was on Scribd, and this is great. Like, it's like a little bit of horror, a little bit of thriller action, great coming of age. I mean, this was just absolutely fantastic. This follows Corey Mackison in Zephyr, Alabama, set in the 60s. You're dealing with KKK. You're dealing with a little bit of voodoo stuff. Turns out I love voodoo in my fantasy. We'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But yeah, Boy's Life was absolutely amazing. That I immediately, it's very rare that I listen to an audiobook and I immediately go and buy a physical copy for my collection because I need it on the shelf. I enjoyed this so incredibly much. I am actually now starting to consider doing a dedicated book review for Boy's Life because this was amazing. This was like a balm to my brain. It was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. A little bit longer than it would appear, but this was so good. If you haven't read Boy's Life and you like Stephen King coming of age, like imagine this is like it without Pennywise or anything related to Pennywise and just these kids in this environment. There's some crappy people in town. There's bullies. There's just, it's so good. So incredibly good. So I am still excited for Swan Song, but Boy's Life just, the mood read knocked it right out of the park there. I then revisited a DNF/review copy, and again, I went and bought a new physical copy because I unhauled this book because I swore I would never come back to it because it had one of my biggest triggers in it. That's John Palladino's The Trials of Ash Mountain. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the only reason it got 4.5 out of 5 stars is because it's got one trigger in there that caused me to DNF it for 6 months. But I'm glad that I finally finished this book. I came back. My brain was just like, maybe you should give it another shot. Maybe you should give it another shot. You've still got the ebook. Why don't, just try it. Just read it. So I did. And I loved it. This was dark goodness. He kept me guessing. Those who may die, more like those who will probably die. That's what the dramatis persona in this book is called. I'm so excited for Buzzard's Bowl Book 2. I believe that comes out early June. So if you have yet to read Trials of Ash Mountain, I did a dedicated book review for this. You can check it out right there. So incredibly good. I loved it. And so I went and bought another book to add it back into my collection to make sure I had it on my shelf. Because it was just good enough to make me need to own a physical copy. Then I finished my review copy for the 3rd Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries by Patricia Meredith. This is Crazy Maids in a Row. And this was a powerhouse for me. I'm really enjoying the period mystery stuff that I've been reading lately. And this was my 4th Patricia Meredith book. 3rd or 4th. I've read 4 from her. And I believe last month was 3rd, so this is 4th, yes. And I mean, just everything that I wanted to have happen in the series happens in this book. The relationships where I wanted them to be. This takes place in an insane asylum. We get more of the baker. Fantastic. If you have yet to check out Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries, do yourself a favor. If you like Agatha Christie stuff, and you want something that's just wholesome, with a lot of great food description and great characterization, please check this one out, because this was everything I wanted to have happen in this series. Next up, speaking of voodoo, probably in contender for one of my top books of the year, we got No Port in a Storm by Cal Black. This is Legends and Legacies, book number 2, and this was probably my book of Q1. like, this one knocked everything else out of the park. It didn't even come close. When this showed up at my door, it was, I call it a TBR wrecker. I literally just swept whatever I was reading to the side and started reading this. I was excited to pick it up every time I looked at it. Every time I sat down to read, I was engaged. I was gripped. I mean, just a fantastic romantic subplot in here, done incredibly well. And don't let that scare you away, because I'm not a romance reader. But, like, we did a thing in book one, and then we explored the ramifications of doing that thing in book one, and whether or not you want to follow through, and whether or not it was a good decision. We get more of Millie's backstory. This is set in, like, a Louisiana bayou. I loved No Port in a Storm. 5 stars. All day long. Then I read Stephen King's revival. Speaking of which, No Port in a Storm and Stephen King's revival were carryovers from March. I started them late March, and they carried over into April. I really enjoyed Stephen King's revival. It kind of was just trucking along day in the life till about 80%, and then it just ramps up and gets a little bit weird. So I ended up giving this one about 4 stars. It's got this kind of weird Lovecraftian ending that wasn't, like, it didn't feel kind of earned throughout the story. Yet we're following, like, Jamie Morton as he goes from, like, boyhood to manhood all the way through his life. And it just, I don't know, the ending felt like it kind of came out of nowhere. So this is a really good Stephen King book, but I don't know. It was a bit much by the end of it. That it was kind of muddled, didn't make a whole lot of sense. And it was an interesting one. And again, I gave that one 4 stars. Then I read book 2 in the Conquer series by Con Iggulden. This is Lords of the Bow. And I have thoughts on this one. This felt very middle book. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. We're no longer kind of focusing on Genghis Khan. Instead, we're kind of focusing on other characters. We still have the same character issues that we had from the first book. And when I started noticing these issues, I looked into the history and what was available. Just kind of a brief cursory search. And what it felt like is because there's not a lot on Genghis Khan. In fact, like on a lot of the research, it was said we just don't know. You know, there's assumptions and stuff like that. So what the author had to work with, he kind of tried to mold the story. And because of that, from what he put in book 1, a lot of what's in book 2 just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. The way that Temujin reacts to Bertha and stuff like that. It just, their relationships no longer, their dynamics didn't make sense anymore. Especially because I'd already looked into the history of Bertha and Temujin and stuff like that. And I already had assumptions because Bertha was supposed to be this preeminent, the empress of the empresses for the Mongols. And then, like, she feels slighted, she feels jaded. Like, it just, I don't know. It just, I wasn't feeling the connection that I felt with the Wolves of the Plain. So, I'm kind of pause on the Conqueror series. I'll probably revisit that in a couple months. It's not a DNF. But, I enjoyed the first book a lot more than I enjoyed the second. So, yeah. Then, moving right along, we have got Eclipse by Herman Struhnagel. This is book 1 in Fractured Orbit. Now, this one felt kind of tried and true to me. I've kind of come across a lot of these tropes while watching classic Doctor Who. I'm a huge classic Doctor Who buff. Especially during the Tom Baker era, a lot of these ideas were explored. So this felt very familiar to me. Also, I had an issue, this felt like a serialized novel. Essentially, it's moving, and then, like, we get to the end, and this feels like part 1 of a 3-part book. So this felt serialized to me. So, like, we kind of, across this whole goal, or this whole book, we've got the reluctant hero. I believe it's Django is the reluctant one? Yeah, Django is kind of very reluctant. He doesn't want to believe things, and so he spends the whole book in denial. And what that ends up doing is, like, by the end of the book, like, we always know what the reluctant hero trope is going to do. So seeing the reluctant hero trope here in this book, and then having it end the way it ends, I just kind of felt very meh on this. Now, I did give it 4 stars because I do like the way that it is executed. I am interested to see what happens in the next book because I think that that could reinforce what happens here in Eclipse. I'm not sure when book 2 comes out, but it should be soon. And yeah, that's kind of my thoughts there on Eclipse. I then read The Fear of Moncroy by Brian Asher. And on this one, this is a standalone novel. And it's only about 250-ish, 53 pages long. And it moves, and it knows what it wants to do. This felt very much like a film script, almost. A very well executed film script, but at the same time still a film script. And what I mean by that is we move at such a pace, and we have so much ground to cover, that we use some mechanics that you could see in a film or an animated kind of feature-length episode of, some sort of anime, to kind of move very quickly. If you like Castlevania, you're gonna like The Fear of Moncroy. Essentially, the Waywards are kind of like this order of monster hunters. They use these snares. Side note, now that I start talking about the magic system and the way the vampirism works and the way that the world is built out, oh my goodness, that was amazing. It felt to me like this could have been a little bit beefier, but I understand what it's doing in trying to be a short standalone, and because it uses a lot of those mechanics and structures and tropes that I would expect from like a film script, I was able to fully enjoy this for what it is. This is a vampire kind of infiltration into the vampire court novel. Very interesting, very good. 4 stars. Now, we have got Anthony Ryan's Legion of Flame. This is book 2 in Draconis Memoria. And this one, luckily, I was able to do on audio because Stephen Brand is not the narrator. I don't listen to any narration by Stephen Brand just because I will go to sleep. And so this one was a interesting kind of evolution of the story. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. And the reason I do that is because it throws in so many more mechanics, like ancient lost civilizations, sci-fi elements, and a lot of the exploration and the expedition stuff, that's all back behind us in book 1. And then Hillebor, his characterization didn't really seem to do anything. Really, Clay is the one that I really resonated the most with. We've got this whole Revolutionary War arc that didn't really feel like it connected and clicked and was earned. Essentially because Elizabeth, or Lizanne, I forget her actual name. I think it's Lizanne. Yeah, Lizanne is enough of a powerhouse that the situation she's put in to be coerced into doing what she does should never have happened. She should have just taken care of it and problem solved. But instead she just capitulates and then goes and does the thing. It ends out really cool and working out to be like really cool scenarios and stuff like that. But overall, it just kind of fell a bit on the flat side for me. I'm hoping that we get massive amounts of payoff in the 3rd book. So that is my thoughts on Draconis Memoria number 2. And then there's 2 current books that I'm still reading. I am 35% into Northern Wrath by Tilda Cold Holt. This is a historical fantasy book by Tilda Cold Holt, book 1 in the Hanged God trilogy. Very Norse. We are getting to kind of explore the gods and stuff like that. And what I kind of appreciate about Northern Wrath is it's historical fantasy, which has recently been my jam. Like, if I'm going to read fantasy, historical fantasy is the way to go. But initially I was like, this is high fantasy. This is full-on fantasy. And then I was like, well, is it high fantasy? No, I don't think it is high fantasy. Maybe I'm just not familiar enough with the lore to realize that this is just low fantasy with historical fantasy vibes thrown in. And I'm absolutely enjoying this. I'm a little confused at certain points on how everything's going to kind of come together. Hilda, her POV in this book is not my favorite. It started out being one of my favorites and then has since I'm kind of wavering, not quite sure. But everybody else is very gripping, very engaging. And even if things aren't quite stitching together the way that I want them to, each individual chapter is interesting enough to just keep me going. So I appreciate that about Northern Wrath. And then I need to talk about the one that I'm currently reading right now. I am reading The Shadow Gate by Ellen McCrae, and I am not loving it. And let me clarify that. So I have this as an arc. It is a great story. It is great magic. It is great world building. And all of that works really, really well. It's a great evolution from Iron of Crown. Where you lost me is the characterization. To me personally, and this could be 100% because I'm in fantasy burnout, but we went from wholesome and kind of dark, story in the Iron Crown to just grimdark here in the Shadowgate, and the flip doesn't work for me. A lot of the characters are incredibly selfish. A lot of them just are not working for me anymore. None of the characterizations really fit together. These don't feel like the characters that I fell in love with in the Iron Crown. And I am seeing a lot of 5-star reviews for this book, so this could 100% be because I am in burnout right now, or I'm just not, or I'm forcing myself to read fantasy when I probably shouldn't be. But as it sits right now, I'm feeling 3-star, 3 to 3.5, because everything else is awesome. It's just the characterization I am wanting for somebody to root for. So that is sadly, this was a book I was incredibly excited about, and I'm hoping that someday I can come back and do a reread, because I'm currently 81% through this book, and for the last 30 to 40% I've had this problem, and it's making me incredibly upset. So hopefully sometime in the future I can come back to this one, because L.L. McRae, Lauren, is one of my favorite authors in the indie kind of scene, so I do want to revisit this one later down the road. That is all I've really got for you today, guys. It was a long video, lots to talk about. Let me know in the comments down below how your April went, and as always, peace out, stay magical, bye. And I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons.